So just kind of going back to what I was kind of introducing, our study groups will happen, once a week, or not once a week, once every section. That's usually the order it comes through. I think for this cohort, I think everyone's schedule pretty much more or less lined up where on Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, we'll have our study groups at, 1 p.m. Eastern time. That's 10 a.m. Pacific time for me. And then there's people in the middle. You guys have to do the math because I will say the wrong thing, so I don't want to say the wrong thing for Central Time and such. But so just kind of keep that in mind. We'll usually go over the sections like material and stuff like this. So like the first section here, we're basically introducing, like how to set up your environment. So thumbs up if people are feeling like, were they able to successfully set up their environment? Thumbs up if not. Okay. If you're having any trouble, thumbs down, like let me know, share on the Slack. Plenty of that stuff happens. My important part is that let me know immediately if you have any trouble with the setup or whatnot. I once had someone wait about 2.5 weeks before they told me, it's like, oh yeah, I haven't been able to install Python 3. And I'm like, oh, well, that would be a huge issue then, wouldn't it? So make sure you let me know. And again, no judgment. You guys will learn pretty quickly that I am not going to scold you. I'm not going to make you feel bad. I embrace questions. I love questions. And I will also actively tell you when I don't know the answer, which I think is a legitimate answer to a lot of these things. I will not try to pretend that I know the answer when I really don't. So be aware of that too. Cool. But this first section, most of it should be relative review from the prep work that you guys have done. So learning about Python, control flows. I'm just reading it off here. Dictionaries, lists, loops. So it's a good review if it's been a while since you've touched Python again since the prep time. I won't go too much into that stuff. Of course, if you're feeling some practice, I'll always have our one-on-ones, which I'll show you guys how to set up. So since it's our first study group, and I want to show you guys a little bit of how things work around here, I'm going to actually share my screen once I have less windows in my life. Okay. All right. And you guys will also learn that it takes me forever to share my screen because I can never find it, which screen I should be sharing. Okay. I think that's it. And then there's you guys. Okay. So Zoom always moves around my screen, so I can never figure out exactly where I'm supposed to be. So this is our orientation. We don't need to talk about that. So this is your learn.co homepage. If you just do for example, learn.co, it should take you here as long as you're signed in. This is what I'll call the home page. I might call it other things, but no, this is kind of like the beginning part. And you can see here basically the curriculum. So right now we have 4 different sections already in module 1. Okay, and so this is where the sections will actually populate as we deploy them. Usually Friday is usually when I put them out, even though we say Monday, but I try to put them out early so that way you guys have the opportunity to look at it ahead of time. And I know sometimes people like using the weekends to catch up on things. So I always put it out there. So right now we're in section 1. So each module, we have a total of 6 modules. Again, 5 projects, which includes the capstone. And then at these modules, you can see they will be broken down by section. So section 1 is getting started. And you can see under each section, in this case, there's a lot of little lessons here. And each of those lessons you would go through. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like over here. I think everyone's already seen this a little bit, but I'm just kind of walking through in case you haven't if you're like, oh, wait, that's how you look at the lessons? Cool. So one thing, it loads up, which takes a second. And you can see usually there's some material. Sometimes there's some interactive code where you can actually code directly on here. We'll talk about that in a second. You can see there's a bunch of information going off the side here. One is that you can click I'm done. And basically I'm done basically says that you've read through the section. This is one of those things where, to be quite honest, everyone does it a little bit differently. I suggest marking it off when you have read through the section and you feel like you are done with that section. Some people have waited until they go through the whole section, mark it all done. Some people, they see it loaded and they click I'm done immediately. The main reason why I'm bringing this up is mostly because it gives me a record of where people are. But it just kind of helps me out. But honestly, I'll probably be talking to you on one-on-one, so I probably get a better feel for where you are and what you're doing anyway. But it's a nice kind of metric for us to kind of double check oh, this is where the student says, click, I'm done here. You can see a few other things here. For example, you can make this bigger. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can also see there's a little button here with the GitHub symbol. So you can see the OctoCat going on here. So if I click on this, you actually will see that it will be a GitHub repo. And this GitHub repo, basically all of the learn pages, all of these things we call them readmes, will be all within some repo. And you can see here from this point, and we'll talk about this tomorrow about how to use GitHub and everything, but this is where we can basically clone it and we can get direct source. So if there's coding or if there's, what's it called, a data source like a CSV file, this is probably where you'd go to go access it. You'll see in some of the sections, and maybe I'll pull up one real quick, is that you can actually go ahead and type directly on here and run Python code. You technically can. I strongly suggest, like, unless you're going to do it really quickly, if you want to use it so you can like go back to it and not going to do it all in one session, and by one session, I mean like within like 10 minutes, okay? I strongly suggest for you to go to the GitHub part and actually what we call fork it. I actually don't even suggest forking it. I actually suggest cloning it and downloading it and then putting it into your Jupyter notebook and working off of that. So I will definitely show this, you know, tomorrow for sure to see that whole process. The Learn curriculum shows you one way of doing that. I will show you another way definitely tomorrow to make sure that all works out. But that gives you an advantage because one, even though this can technically run code, I'm just gonna delete this stuff. If I run this, you can see I can run this just like a Jupyter notebook, which is super useful to test things out, but it will not save your work, at least in the state that it lives right now. So if you, for example, all of a sudden the internet connection goes down, if you refresh the page or it decides to refresh for whatever reason because of some technical weirdness, your information, your stuff that you've worked hard on, maybe for the past like 15, 30 minutes, an hour, won't be saved there. So my suggestion is make your own copy of it. And that way you have it on your computer too. This is super useful, especially if you know you're traveling. I have sometimes people say like, oh, I'm gonna be traveling over this weekend, so I won't have internet access. You can actually ahead of time basically save these lessons locally on your computer and work on them. So it's super useful that way. Okay, so I kind of showed you the next I'm done button. There's a couple things down in this right-hand corner. You can see here, it's kind of a little fun thing. You can basically add your friends on here. So you can basically add each other on the study group or cohort. If you meet someone like through Slack, or even if you go to WeWork and you meet someone in person who's in Flatiron, it's kind of a nice little quick check. You can see who's online and stuff. So I think it's a nice little kind of thing. You don't have to use this. And then on the right here, you'll actually see when you're in this study group, you'll actually see, or not in the study group, in this particular section, in this lesson, relevant study groups that are coming up will pop up here. And in fact, you can see is that it's not just, is it just one of them? Here, I'm trying to see if there's other ones. Okay, there usually will be the ones that we're most relevant to because there will be the study groups I set up, but there can also be study groups from other cohorts and you're welcome to join any other study group. One thing I would suggest if you do join another study group session like this, but with another cohort, is make sure, you know, introduce yourself either to the little Slack, or not Slack, to the little Zoom chat. Also, what's it called? Usually the instructor will kind of say, oh, like, you know, how's it going and stuff like that. One thing I would suggest is try not to go too far ahead. Like if you see someone like on module 4, my suggestion is don't go into module 4. You'll probably not know what's going on. And 2 is that it just might not be like worth your time in that sense. But you're welcome to go. You're welcome to go in it. No one's going to like purposely kick you out. The only ones I would say is that like if you find a study group that is probably more specific to that cohort, then you might want to leave it out. So I'm going to show you guys where to find this. But before I go into that, does anyone have questions about this general page here when we see up a lesson? Oh, sound good? Thumbs up? I mean, I think at this point, you guys have at least seen one of these pages, right? And it's cool, you can see who's completed it already. So I know pretty much everyone's at least gotten to this point. Okay, so there's a couple of things up here. I showed you the curriculum part where you can basically jump to wherever you want in this curriculum for these in section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. On Fridays, you'll see more parts pop up. Their portfolio projects, I won't click on this right now, but study groups. So I mentioned about study groups popping up here if it's relevant, but you can also go directly here. And this is where all the study groups that are posted, there we go, are posted will populate here. So that will just be one, like you can see this guy here, he's been creating a lot of study groups for different cohorts. So you can see, for example, we have our study group right here for meet your classmates. Usually instructors will put specifically which cohort this is. So these are the ones I'm talking about. Like if you see another one from another instructor, you're welcome to join it. But if you see something specific for this cohort, usually that means it's going to be much more geared towards them versus like actually be like an instructional part. So just be aware of this. But you can see here, for example, let's say you were on module 5. you can like join this this study group here and say, oh, you know, like, I would like a review with like module 5, because maybe you're really far ahead, but you didn't get the chance to go through that. So that's always a good option. And you can see here's some other instructors. Here's one from Raphael. And then here's some other ones. For example, we have Dara. So this one what I'm talking about is like, even though you're welcome to join these, this would probably be one that's like, don't really need to go. This is for your part-time cohorts. And you can see here, module intro project. Sometimes they'll put like, you know, the different parts here that's specific to that cohort. So you'll see little events pop up here and everything. Okay. And I think you guys have seen this already. You basically can go onto these cohorts and then you can click RSVP. And that will basically populate your name in here. And that helps anyone who's leading the study group, whether it's me or another instructor or even another student, know basically, get an idea of who's attending. So I strongly suggest make sure if you're going to like our study groups, RSVP, because that way I know kind of like what's going on and stuff like that. But it's not required. You can join in afterwards. And we'll also have a Zoom link underneath here. Our class, I'll keep it consistent for us. I'll share that out. But basically, our Zoom link for this class, I'll keep it consistent so that way you guys don't have to like look for the Zoom link every single time. Okay, cool. Any questions about finding this and finding study groups? Pretty cool. Okay, cool. And so I'm going to go back to our Learn Co part because it's kind of relevant to like okay, like I know there's study groups that are for our class, but I don't know where to find them, or I'm too lazy to click the study groups, which is what I usually am. I don't want to go click on that part. So you go to your Learn Co dashboard, which you can also just approach just by clicking up here. And you scroll down and you can see some study groups that you're already RSVP'd, maybe some that are coming up in the next bit of time. And then at the very bottom here, oh, this is fun. So a little gamification for you guys is as you finish the lessons and stuff like that, you can see basically what percentage you're going through, your learning streak, your velocity. So if you go through many, many lessons very quickly, hopefully, you know, if you're someone who gets, you know, this kind of person who likes the gamification, obviously try to make sure you stay with like actually learning it, not just clicking them done, I'm done, I'm done. So I'm sure you guys know that. But at the bottom here, you'll see there's some relevant stuff to our cohorts. So this is actually your guys' specific homepage. So only you guys will see this page in the cohort, that is. And so you can see here is that we have our calendar, and you can see I'll put the events on here. So Meet Our Classmates is coming up tomorrow. In my time, it's 11, it's Eastern time. So yeah, I think some people asked about, I think Carly and maybe it was Jeffrey too, brought up about the time zone on the bottom here. Someone brought it up at least, about the time zone. I think all of these will be listed in Eastern time, just be aware of that. If you do open up in your own calendar, it will show up obviously in your time, but at least default display, I think it shows the Eastern time zone. I'm gonna see if I can change that, but I think it's stuck this way. So you can see here that there's different parts. You can see where it's happening. You can see where the actual link is to this study group. So for example, if I go here, let's go ahead, go to this link, you'll see the study group that is here. And you say, oh, look at these beautiful faces, you know? So this is your classes that you're all joining over here. Okay. So this is where you can find your events. Usually it's by week, but you can also see here are different like module 1 begins, module 1 project begins over here. You'll also see when our assessments, oh, cool, we got a little break here. So you guys got a break actually pretty early on in September. So that's when we basically have, what's it called? Oops, I might have to talk to Dara about that. Okay, but anyway, we have a school break. Usually what that means is that I don't really like call it a break. I like to call it a curriculum pause, because it means that no new material is going to be put in there. Basically, that week is going to be erased. Your Slack is still open. It's kind of like we describe it as like the campus is empty, but you're welcome to be on campus kind of deal. So basically it means that instructors aren't really there. If there's something really urgent, we might respond, but it's not going to be like that same day, if that same day. Sometimes, for example, instructors, we might take breaks ourselves. We might not be out. We might be out and not be able to respond back to us. So just be aware during those school breaks. But coming up, you can see on the other calendar, our module 1 project assessment begins. So this is usually the week after our project. So you can see here, this is our project week where basically we only have just our project, you know, like we're just working on our project, no new curriculum. And then next week we have our project assessments. And so these will actually go on through this whole week and into next week. You do your assessment to basically pass your project. Note that module 2 will begin here. Okay, so I kind of also mark down when we have our new module start. So we'll be learning new curriculum on these days or on these weeks. And then you can see here, this is why I mentioned that that hard deadline is I put like due project 1 or mod 1 project assessment final deadline. So this basically is like, oh, this is like really like your last day to do your assessment. And in reality, I don't try to shoot for you guys to do your assessment on this day. At the very latest, I'm looking like Thursday, Friday. But if things come up, this is kind of like your official last day. Like there's like your safety net. So just know this comes through. And you can see all the different dates on here, different module projects beginning, module starting, and when they're doing everything like that. Cool. Any questions about this calendar? Cool. All right, you guys are a pretty quiet bunch. All right. Or maybe you're all on mute, so maybe you guys are all saying things under your breath and I can't hear you now. Cool. So underneath this calendar, as I think some people have already seen, there's some resources here. For example, the project rubrics. There will be a video, basically explanation that will go on here when we get to this different project. But you can right now check out the rubric and see, okay, what's the requirements for this? And so you can actually see for each different project, you can see here, basically, it's a little checkbox. And essentially, to pass the project, you need at least accomplished. If you have a checkbox in the developing part, it means that we're going to have you go back at some level and change it. This might also mean that you have to, like, it might be a very minor change. Like, it's like, oh, like, you forgot a thank you slide, like, in your presentation. You should probably put that in there. And all you should do is add it in there. If it's something more drastic, like, for example, it's like, oh, like, you got their idea, but you maybe missed that the modeling section, like maybe you just skipped over it or ran out of time or something like that. Might have to have you do that part over. But this is kind of like your go-to, like say like, okay, if I'm checking all the boxes on accomplished or on the X factor side, you're in a pretty good shape of where your project is. Note that even though these are different checkboxes, like you're welcome to go beyond, whatever we have required on here. This is something it's more like, for us to assess that if you actually completed your project and you understood it. But of course, your project, you should own it for yourself. So if you want to add something extra to it that's not on this rubric, go for it, right? One thing I will note, though, is that don't go too hard on a project assessment when you only have a week to do your project. So if you try to do something really, really advanced, like you try to make a machine learning model that will basically detect speech, and translate it into French, obviously that's not going to take you a week. So be realistic. But my thing is at least fulfill these goals right here, because that will put your project in a good shape. And of course you can add on to it as you make sure you check those boxes. Okay. And we'll talk more about this as we get closer into our actual project. Okay.
Victor, I have a quick question. Yeah. So the assessment, is that actually like time that we present our project to you? Is that what the assessment is?
Yeah, so the assessment is exactly that. It'd be usually me, it could be another instructor, but it's basically a one-on-one. It's kind of like a one-on-one that's more focused on the project. So the way it usually goes is you have 4 different parts of your project to turn in. So one is your Jupyter notebook, your technical part. So this is all your code, everything's working. Maybe you're writing about it and explaining your code and like, your notebook and walking through it. That's like the first part of it. So we'll actually together, like for about 30 minutes, I usually like, for example, I will take the role of like, oh, I'm like on a data science team, or like I'm one of your team members or a data science manager, basically someone who's familiar with data science, but maybe not familiar with your specific project you are working on. So like your specific data set, and we'll walk through it together and say, okay, like, what's this do? Like, oh, can you like, how do you do this? Or like, why did you do it this way? And stuff like that. So it's a little more technical. In that sense. So that would be about 30 minutes walking through your notebook. And then there's about 10 to 15 minutes where there's a non-technical piece where it's a presentation. And this non-technical presentation, basically you will be presenting to, like, you pretend you're presenting it to an audience of stakeholders. So like, what do these people care about, about your data? And so you want to make sure you can communicate this part effectively and essentially like not too long and not too short to an audience, say what actionable items should you do at this point. And so that will be your non-technical piece. And usually like as an instructor in this role, I might at the end ask some questions, say, oh, can you tell me more about this, And this will be, again, we'll go more in detail when we get to this closer to this point, but we'll go in and talk about, these are things that I, like as a data scientist, I have found, and these are the things that I think you should do based on what my findings. And you want to make sure you don't start talking about, advanced statistics and stuff like this or anything that you're going into, because you're talking to a non-technical audience. So that's a good development for communication. So I said there's 4 parts. So those are the first 2. The third part is your blog. So a blog always accompanies with your project. That's not something we'll go over the assessment, but in order to pass your project, part of the assessment is fulfilling your blog, basically completing your blog. And then the 4th part is actually you're going to do a video recording of you presenting your project. And really that's just, people say, oh, do I need to like record, like physically record myself? I'm like, no, you just got to record, like screen capture your screen and just go through your PowerPoint presentation, showing you like, oh, like, you know, here's my presentation. And we kind of have like a dual purpose reason for this, for the video. One is like, so we can actually have some record of saying, oh, you actually have done this, you know, there is a presentation that we can reference. But 2, it also helps you practice before your actual assessment. So sometimes I don't know about you all, but I don't necessarily like recording myself or hearing myself talk a whole lot. So, you know, it's kind of intimidating sometimes, but I think it's really useful. It's like when you're practicing it through on your video presentation, and make sure that you know the timing and you got a feel for it before you do your live assessment with me or another instructor. Okay. Does that kind of clear things up, Lauren?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and this is where, like, honestly, like in a couple of weeks, we'll go into our project and I'll go really into detail and we'll have a whole like study group to talk about like what specifically we're looking for and what things to look out for. Cool. All right. So any other questions on that assessment since we were just on that? All right, sound good? Cool. So again, you can find those rubrics here, including all the way up to the capstone. So these should all be available. And then as the video, like I'll usually record a session explaining what the project is. Any questions about this, I'll usually put this link right directly here. They're right here. One of our instructors actually found a couple of things that they found really useful when we talk about Git, which is tomorrow. Some use a couple of videos on like Git commands and how to use Git. So these things I personally haven't like gone through them myself, but I've heard from other students that they can be really useful. So that might be something to go through yourself. And you know what I like to do, especially these videos, I like to like speed up the video a little bit, like on YouTube, like because sometimes like people kind of like talk really slowly. And like, I know this part, like I can speed this up a little bit. I'll skip around, I'll pause it and stuff like that. I think this one's a little bit longer. I think this one's like about 15 minutes. So I would say you could probably speed through parts of this if you're getting understanding parts of it. But here's some resources here. Then here's some important stuff, some contact info. So this right here, this link is going to be how you schedule your one-on-ones. With this link, you basically click on this. If I click on it, it's just going to open up my page. So actually, no, maybe you'll open up what you see. Oh, good. So this is what you'll see here. So if you click on this link here, basically this is how you schedule your weekly one-on-ones. You click your time zone. So for me, I'm Pacific time. And there's some little directions here, but basically you choose your day and you can see the opening times. You can see here, I don't have many open times left. Oh, that's because my own schedule's conflicting. So you should be able to see more times, I think. But you basically will click here, you click your time. Now, since you guys are full-time, you can pick up to 2 different times, basically 1 block total. These start like, for example, 9 a.m., go for 30 minutes. So 9 to 9:30 would be our one-on-one. If you want to pick a block that's together, you can basically pick those 2 blocks, 9 and 9:30, and that will be your 1 block of 1 hour. Some people, which I think some people prefer this way, as they'll pick like a half hour here and then like a half hour like later in the week. You can do that too, as long as there's a time available. One thing, this is more for if, you know, I think everyone's schedule is kind of flexible. But if you are more comfortable with a very set scheduled date, and maybe that's the way you function, maybe that's the way you like it better, let me know. And maybe we can set this up directly. You don't have to keep putting in every week. But if you like the flexibility where you're like, hey, like, you know, sometimes I feel like I want to meet at this time, sometimes I don't, you can go into here. And I'll see this on my calendar, and I'll usually send you, I'll like do a little automation script. And basically, I'll send you like a little confirmation thing to let you know. One thing to note is that, for example, today is, what is today? Today is Tuesday, right? So you're fine for signing up for times for like, you know, let's say Wednesday and Thursday, right? But if it's like Wednesday night and you sign up for one on Thursday in the morning, just send me a message on Slack. If it's like, I'd say probably like 12-hour difference, just so I'm aware of it, because sometimes in the morning I'm like, oh, no one signed up for my times, cool. Like, and I'll just kind of go through. But if you do it like late at night, I might not realize it until like the morning. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I had a one-on-one. So just make a message if you have to do it like at the last minute. But whatever works well for you guys. Okay. Any questions on how to set up these one-on-ones and such? Okay. Cool. So again, that link is right here. And usually I'll kind of send out a reminder, throughout the week, say, hey, sign up for one-on-ones, but you can just find it directly here. And then, of course, you can sign up for one-on-ones with Dara, I believe. I can't remember the exact timing. So if you haven't done this already, definitely sign up with her. I want to say you can do it twice a month, but it might be once a month with Dara. Basically, make sure you do your first kickoff call ASAP. She can walk you through a whole bunch of things. She's also really great. She can give you a whole lot of information on how to not procrastinate, things that can help you, honestly, dealing with stress sometimes of going through sections. She's really great at helping people find the best way for them to work. I can tell, the thing is, I can tell you some information, but that's the only way I really know how works well for me. And even then, it's not always the best for me. So Dara has a lot more resources in that sense. So it's always great to check in. I think sometimes people kind of forget to do it, but like Dara said, every time everyone's afterwards, oh, I should have used this more often because it's available to me. Okay. About me survey, I think most people have done this already. So if you haven't already, this kind of just gives a little quick information. It's just kind of useful stuff. To be quite honest, it's not 100% necessary, but I invite you to do it because it's super useful. Student services email. So this is much more if you ask me, for example, you're oh, look, something came up. I might have to transfer or put a pause or something like that just because of life events or any kind of questions about finances. I won't really know how to answer it because I'm not really in charge of those kind of financial stuff. So student services would be a great resource to ask this. And if you ask me in a one-on-one, you're welcome to bring it up in a one-on-one. And I might point you in student services or say, oh, I think I heard about this, but I think the best one to contact. But you can contact them directly with this email right here that I put here. It's a good resource to have. Last one is our student resources spreadsheet, which is a mouthful, but it can be super useful. This is basically a collection of different recordings. So you guys can all see the spreadsheet right now, right? Cool. So you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff. But basically, for every section, we are different. So I'm going to say this. Our instructors, we all have different styles of explaining things. And I definitely have a certain style of explaining certain stuff. So sometimes, though, you might say, well, you know what? I really want to see, how would someone else explain this? So what's nice is that we actually have a collection of different recordings and such right here from the different instructors for the different subjects, what module, what section, what section of the parts. So you can see here's a few recordings from Raphael. Note that we do version 2, so you guys aren't going to be on version 2, so if you ever see that reference. There is version 1, which, to be quite honest, is relatively the same. There's some different stuff, but you probably can go into here and go into section 1 and see, or version 1 and see those different recordings. For the most part, us instructors will put down what specifically we're talking about in these recordings. So just kind of be aware. And, for example, let's say, for example, you find Jeff. Jeff likes to do a lot of code-alongs and stuff like that. That might be something you're oh, I really like seeing Jeff's style. It really matches really well. I don't feel like you'll ever offend me by going and watch someone else's instructor's recordings and stuff like that. I think it's a perfectly, and actually I recommend doing that. It's always good to get from different sources. So you can find them by instructor. I would say for the most part, the topic keywords, it might not be there or not. It's probably easier to just go off of the different title off here, okay? Couple things I did want to mention about this. What is it? Oh, for the most part, we instructors tend to put it as the whole recording, which is an hour-long recording. I personally, I kind of feel, I try to split up my videos. So I'll record our sessions too, so you can reference it back. I'll split them up into different parts. So you'll see, let me see, example. So here's a good one. So here's one section 18, and I'll put it as 3 different parts. That way you can look at that specific one and not have to watch a whole hour-long video to look for that specific thing that you're asking a question on. Just note that that's not true for all of them. There might be a longer video, and you might have to skip around a little bit. Okay. But this is a great resource here, especially if you're oh, I want to see how someone else explains this. Cool. Any questions about this? No? Okay, cool. So this is where all the recordings will go. I will, for the most part, though, I will, there's nothing recorded right now, but I'll actually put down our different recordings in a playlist, and that way you guys, and I'll break it up by module, and that way you guys can look at the module and go through it. And then also, if you have to go, let's say you're in module 3, you're oh wait, we talked about this in module 1, you can go to that specific playlist and play it from our cohort. So I'll also have that link down here as well. Okay, cool. Some common commands. So we'll talk about this tomorrow, basically some git add and stuff like this. To the point where this will probably, you will never have to look at this again because you basically have this memorized because you're going to do this over and over again for the next 5 months. But at least it's here for the beginning. And again, some common terminal commands. So these are things that we saw that students usually have to reference and stuff like that, at least at the very beginning. Well, over time, you probably will get used to it and you won't have to like really look at these small little commands. Okay. And again, weekly recordings. Program guide here. This is some information from Flatiron itself. Really great to just read through. I highly recommend reading through because this is probably like the most common thing that happens where people feel like I am falling behind, what's going on. This can give you a little bit of detail about what's this program, like what's it called? The different parts of like if you're starting to fall behind. So that's at the very bottom at this homepage. All right. So try to go through this quickly. I know it kind of can go on for a little bit long. Any questions about this homepage, any part of it? Okay, cool. So one last thing about this is all administration kind of stuff. So hopefully you're not feeling like, oh man, this is taking forever. Trust me, study groups will be a little more focused on data science in the future. But your blog right here, so you can actually post your blog directly on here. I don't know what's going to show up for me because I don't have it on here. Okay, good. So there's a different like, excuse me, how to do your blog and the different parts of your blog. There's suggestions on what to write. For the most part, you can kind of ignore this. It's not something like I usually will explain like, oh, these are things I'm looking for, what I'd suggest for the different projects, but you can submit the blog directly through here. If you need help as you get closer to this, let me know and I can walk you through it and we can work on it together. You can create your blog directly on here on the learn.co. You don't have to do it this way. In fact, for the most part, I think most people use it on medium.com or their own personal website. I actually strongly suggest doing something like that where it's really visible, but you're welcome to blog directly on here. And of course, you're welcome to cross posts, right? As long as whatever you're using allows that kind of stuff. Okay, cool. So that is kind of like the general part. Explore, ask a question. I didn't talk about that, but it's up here. You can ask a question directly, especially if you're in a specific curriculum part. So say I click on here, I can click ask a question, gonna load, yeah. You can ask a question, you can type it here. One suggestion, if you do ask a question on here and you don't get a response within like 20 minutes and it's something urgent, go ahead and ask on Slack and use whatever you're comfortable with too, but know that this is directly at least tied onto here. And you can also see some like resolved questions too if the people asked it on here. Okay, cool. Awesome, so any questions now going through? All right, so that's kind of our introduction to this part. So I'm gonna actually move my screen over so I can actually see my notes that I have through here. Oh, good, okay. So we have about 15 more minutes in class of our study group, okay. One thing you might wanna do when you start up, first of all, thumbs up, who has launched Jupyter? Okay. Good. Everyone has launched Jupyter. Awesome. So usually what will happen, you'll type in your terminal, Jupyter Notebook, and whoop, this thing pops up on your browser, right? Okay. So right here, I just have a set of, I just have this part of my notebook. So I'm going to show you a couple things. So we obviously, if you already have files in here, you'll see them in here, but you can also create new files. So we can create new. So hopefully you guys all have seen this part. You can click new and then Python 3 notebook. Does that sound familiar? Thumbs up if you know what I'm talking about. Thumbs up, I don't know. Okay, cool. So right here, and you'll see my thing pop up a little different. I have some extensions in here. This is, usually you won't see this. Usually you'll see something that looks like without this. So you see like, oh, a blank thing with Untitled 1, okay? I am going to tell you guys how to be an amazing data scientist. Never have untitles. Just at least put a title, even if you're just like junk stuff. I don't know. Oh, and I don't like spaces in my name files. Okay, so I'll use an underscore and stuff like that. But like always name your thing. You'll it'll save you so much time in the future. There's so many times where I've opened up and I've left them untitled. So just name them right away. In here, basically Jupyter Notebook, and this is kind of review stuff that you might already have seen. By default, it's code. So I can write Python codes. For example, I can say, okay, print, 1. And cool. So a couple ways we can run this right here. So I can do print 1. I can just do click run, and that'll run here. Like, oh, nice. I can also on here, and I know you can't see my keyboard, if I click Control and then Enter, it runs that. I can also do Shift and Enter, runs it. Okay, and you can see here as I run it, that in and then that for part. This is just saying what order you ran it in. So this is the 5th command, 6th command, 7th command, as many times as you want, right? I could also have done something like if I run this right here and I run this part, you can see this comes up 16. I can just run this a few times. And that way I know that this was the 16th command run through. This was run the 24th time. This kind of gives you an idea of orders because you can hop around what things you run on your Jupyter Notebook. Note one thing that you probably don't have this guy. I might show you guys some Jupyter Notebook extensions. This won't pop up on your Jupyter Notebook by default. This is kind of like a little extension to help make things useful. So just know if you don't see it specifically, that's okay. You'll mostly just see this guy and then the output. Okay. So these are kind of like your codes. You can add more code blocks like here, right? And you can tell by their code blocks because, or code cells. So I should call them cells because that's what they are. You can see that basically there's this little part right here. This is input, okay, and this would be your output. So one thing you just like, well, what if I want to write like a title or more like a paragraph form? You can technically write in here, but so that like, okay, so like random stuff. But if the problem is if I tried running this obviously is not Python. I'm like, I don't know what this is. So like, well, I don't really want it to be Python. I want it to be something else. You can go at this top up here where it says code. You can change it to Markdown, and Markdown basically makes it all nice and pretty. Ooh, right? So it basically makes it nice and pretty. It's basically an HTML. It's a way of writing HTML, basically web pages. So I'll talk about this in the future too, but you can write, for example, headings. So you can see here, like, oh, okay, this is my heading right here. You can also write subheadings. Okay, so you can see this part right here. And this is an extension. I think I have it numbered automatically. Yours might not necessarily be numbered automatically, just to kind of know there's a difference. But usually we can have subheadings, headings, and then does anyone know what a subheading would look like? Where to start this off with? I guess.
3 number signs.
3 number signs, 3 number signs, 3 pound signs, 3 octothorpes, however you want to call it, hashtags. There is no official name, but yes, you write 3 octothorpes or whatever you want to call it. Does anyone know what an octothorpe, or have you ever heard that word before? Okay, I see some nods. Fun fact, octothorpe. So again, this side right here, there's a whole history of this pound sign. So it's also called pound. Okay, it's actually because on the telephone, it was actually the pound symbol in England. And so they just said, oh, it's the pound symbol. There was never a sign for this. Also, people call it the number sign. We now call it usually hashtag, right? Because of like Twitter and whatnot. Octothorpe literally was given because it sounds like a complicated name. Literally, that's what the documentation said. Like, we're going to give it a complicated name. I think it was Bell Labs said we're going to call it an octothorpe because it sounds cool. So anyway, you can write whatever. So you can see subheadings. This is a good way to organize your writing. You'll see also, let's see here if I can grab curriculum. So if you'll see actually the curriculum, like what are the different README pages, this is actually all Markdown. So you can actually clone this and play around with it and see how the way they structure this. There's a bunch of things we can do. I'll talk more about how to like make a good formatted Jupyter Notebook, especially as we go into the project. But just know that you can do all that stuff to write in like more write about your notebook, write about your code than the actual code part. Okay. A couple other things. These are really basics. So remember, comments in Python are starting with also a hashtag, octothorpe, number sign, whatnot. Okay. So comments. One rule I have, people usually ask me when they're writing their own stuff, like, when do I write Markdown, which is like these Markdown cells, and when do I write like code comments? And usually what my rule is say, this stuff, the Markdown, is talking about what your code is doing. Like, what is your goal? Like, you're creating a narrative and saying, what are you trying to do with the code? And then these comments are more explaining specifically what are these lines of code actually doing. So it's explaining like, oh, okay, like if I had a for loop, I would say, oh, I'm iterating over this thing to get the sum of the list. Like that would be my comment. Versus over here, I might say like, we need to look at the sum so we can calculate the average of this list. Like, or something along those like, oh, like we need to find the average because the average is most relevant. Like that's something else beyond the actual code. Okay. So, and you'll get a feel for what this looks like in the future too. All right, so that is some Jupyter stuff. I will show you lots of little fun tricks in here. For right now, you at least know how to write this stuff. You know how to run it. You can do run. One thing I would suggest is if you ever get stuck, you're like, this is not working out, you can do a kernel restart. Where's it? Restart right here. And what this will do, it basically will restart your whole kernel. So that means like it basically wipes all its like little internal memory. And so now I can run this over. So if I run this now, it'll show it in 1. And you can see it's no longer 16 and stuff like this. Another cool trick, if you say, okay, like I like something weird happened, or I want to make sure it's fresh and runs from top to bottom, you can do a restart and run all. And it'll basically restart the whole thing and then just run the whole cell all the way through. All the way through. You can also equivalently do run all. This is not doing a restart, so you can do run all, and it'll basically start from the top and run all the way down and going through. So this is useful, for example, if you see on curriculum, you're like, hey, I want to see it, like, I just want to see what the output is on the curriculum side. You can run all the way through, all the way down, and you can see what outputs. You might come with errors. So for example, I'll show you what this would look like if I had an error. So this is nonsense, can't run this, but if I do cell run all, note, watch, I'm putting it on my screen like you guys can see it. If you look at this block right here, oh, that's fun. You can see this block right here. This is not, this should execute after, but it's gonna hit stopped right here. So if we do run all, you'll see, and it gives an error and it doesn't ever run this. So it'll stop after that error. So be aware of those kind of things if you ever try to do a run all. Trying to think if there's anything else I'm missing that you guys should know. Anyone got anything, any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Carly.
So if you want to save this, do you just hit the save button, or do you have to do something with like the git commands to make sure you're saving the versions of it?
Yes, and that's where Git we'll talk about for, we'll go over a lot of detail tomorrow. But yes, for save, you can do file save or save as, right? Also save. You also see like this part here. Sometimes if you have changes, it'll auto save. So it's kind of nice as I'll do a little checkpoint in case something happens. But usually you can just click save right here. You can also do your commonly Command S or Control S if you're Windows, or any other operating system, I guess, than Mac. Real quick, who has a Mac? Just raise your hand. Okay, who has Windows? Raise your hand. Is anyone using not any of those two? Okay, cool. All right, those are the two we recommend. Other options would be like Linux. No one has a Chromebook, right? Okay, cool. Chromebooks might be a little not powerful enough. I don't think you could even get to this point in Chromebook. So, cool.
Hey, Victor.
Yeah.
Can you share us with this that add-on for that makes these like subscripts and stuff like that? I mean, is it okay?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is
pretty cool. That's pretty cool because I was always typing, typing them in manually.
Yeah, definitely, and that's something I think I'm gonna share. I'm gonna go over tomorrow too with Git, but I can share it with you guys on the Slack, and that way you guys can kind of look at it and see what kind of fun little extensions you can have and install in there. No problem. And there's a whole bunch of them too, so you'll find ones that are useful for you. I usually make these table of contents because when I'm making notebooks for you guys, it's a little bit easier to read and everything like that too. Cool. So this is Jupyter Notebook. You guys probably have some use already doing this. I'm not going to go through like for loops and stuff right now. If you want to, of course, we can always go over. Just let me know in the Slack. Trying to think of anything before I have my time run down.
I have a question on the notebook. What is why is there a red line and then this?
Oh yeah, so this is also setting. See, this is the hard part for me to remember, like what things are settings for me and not. This is basically a mark. There's nothing important here at all. So for example, if I go, let's see. It doesn't, yeah. Basically, it's just a marker to say, oh, this is to make nice, clean code to make sure everything's 80 characters in. It doesn't go past that point. It just makes it more readability. And that's, again, something we'll talk about for next time as well.
Do you think that like in, companies, they prefer, like some of them might have that kind of rule that you can only be in so many characters per line?
Everyone will have their style. Or you're just asking, like, will people do that?
I mean, companies like Google, they're kind of famous for their style guide, right? But I mean,
yeah. Yeah, if you're working with any technical company, even like any company, usually they'll have some kind of style guide, depending who you're working with, obviously. Google, for example, like you said famously, has a specific style guide that you can find online. That's actually I'm going to show next time too. We'll use something called PEP 8. That's usually a good standard to say what people do. If you ever watch, like, who's ever watched like Silicon Valley through HBO? Cool. You know, tabs versus spaces. If you remember that episode where he basically argues should use tabs or spaces, there could be style guides like that too. It all depends on, you know, who you're working with.
Yeah, I'm just saying probably the most common ones, right? Because I'd like to get used to kind of coding in the style that's kind of very, very commonly accepted. You know, kind of expected that way. It's not such much transition and you start working.
And this is where PEP 8, and we'll talk about this for next time as well, what the basic standard guide of like what Python says we should use. And pretty much every company has at least PEP 8, maybe some variations for their specific ways they do things. But if you follow PEP 8, which there's a lot, you can see how much standardization there's in here. But if you follow PEP 8, you're probably in pretty safe waters. Okay. Cool. Cool. So that's Jupyter Notebook. Any other questions? Any kind of follow-up? And, you know, feel free to bring stuff for tomorrow too when we go even deeper into this stuff. If you have a question on Slack, you know, you're like, oh, like, wait, I didn't ask this part. You can throw it on there. One thing I will, I'll show this to you guys next time. Yeah, I'm gonna do that next time. But I have some resources for you guys that I will share to you guys, and I will show you guys what that looks like. I'm trying to think if there's anything I should tell you guys so you guys can get started for the rest of the day and then into tomorrow. Again, tomorrow, remember we have Meet Your Classmates, which is at, I'm gonna say my time because I'm gonna mess up it's 8 a.m. Pacific time. I think that's 11 a.m. Eastern time. Oh wait, hey, look, I can go to the Learn homepage here and see what's on the calendar. Oh, look at that, right? Okay, so all right, cool. Meet Your Classmates is 11 a.m. Okay, so this is where you, Dara, I'll probably join maybe for a short bit, maybe not the whole time. But I'm gonna say I don't call anything mandatory because I'm chill like that. But I'd say go to this. So get to know each other and everything like that. But that's coming up at 11. Our normal study group times will be on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And so afterwards at 1 p.m., so this time right now, 1 p.m. Eastern time, we'll have our next study group on section 2. So make sure as much as possible, get through section 2. That does not mean you have to understand every part up to section 2. But at least be familiar enough like what Git is, how to practice Git. And I've already seen people ask me questions about Git, which is awesome. And we'll go over a few things and as well as some Jupyter stuff and other kind of like more technical stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah, and then just know we have that Thursday as well. And then Friday, we'll kind of do a little bit different than the normal. We'll actually do a little pair programming, but be prepared to get through section 4 by that Friday as much as possible. Again, you don't need to understand everything, but do the best you can. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, good meeting you guys all virtually. If you guys have any questions, I'm always on Slack. Just a quick thing, just remember, I do have a couple other cohorts, so I might not always be like immediately available, but I'll try to get it back to you guys as soon as possible. So one thing I suggest, if you do have a question, you're welcome to direct message me on Slack, you know, say, oh, like, hey, Victor, like I had this thing or whatnot. You're welcome to ask me those questions. I strongly recommend, if you can, to share as a cohort group. Oh, I just realized I didn't show you guys Slack. I'm gonna show you guys that real quick, if you guys are okay with that. So, oh, Slack's been blowing up. Okay, it's always blowing up. Okay, so you guys can see my personal little Slack here. Here's a little picture of you guys, right? So this is your cohort channel here. You can see here, basically you can do some tags of people. So if you have used Slack before, that's kind of how you do stuff. You'll see I have a lot more channels than you guys have right now. But this is going to be your main channel right here. This is where you can talk with your cohort. If there's questions about the cohort stuff, I'll answer it. You guys will answer it and all that stuff. So kind of something to look forward to. If you have a question, I suggest putting it out here first, then just direct messaging me. You're welcome to direct message me, but you're more likely to get responses from not just me, but other people as well that can help you out. So if it takes me like an hour and a half to get to you, you don't have to wait an hour and a half for any answer. You can maybe hopefully get someone else too. Also know that Ben and Matt, I'm going to share this on Slack a little bit later, are also available sometimes when I'm not available. And they're our technical coaches that can help you through any technical questions and stuff. Again, Dara's great. Dara's a great one to tag for any parts. Just know that she's not technical. So if you ask her, like, Dara, how do you do this on Jupyter Notebook? She'd be like, I don't know. Like, don't ask me. No, she'll say it in a much friendlier way. But anyway, but other parts in here, I'm going to add you guys to these different channels. We have our different ones. For example, we're going to talk about Python DS. So this might be a good place to ask other students as well. You can see 200 students are on this channel itself. I'll add you guys manually onto here after we get off this call. But these are where you can ask questions about each specific parts. This is mostly where you're going to live for right now in Module 1. But then Module 2, we'll probably talk about into this module channel and stuff like this. And this might be good to make more related questions to that specific module. Okay. And of course, you can do direct messages to whoever. All right, cool. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for letting me share that last bit. I know I kind of ran over a little bit, but there was a lot for us to go through since it's kind of like our second first day. Yeah.
All right, thanks a lot, Victor.
No problem. All right, take care, everyone.